The night stretches quietly across the plains, and the snow reflects a pale, silvery light under the stars. The wind moves gently across the frozen ground, carrying with it the crisp, biting chill of winter. Yet, within the carefully arranged circle of teepees, warmth persists. This is the heart of the Native American village, a sanctuary against the cold. The teepee is a marvel of understanding nature. Its conical form is designed to resist the force of the wind. Each pole, carefully selected for strength and flexibility, forms the skeleton of the shelter. Over this frame, stretched hides form a protective skin. Buffalo hides, deer skins, or sometimes elk, are treated, dried, and layered to provide maximum insulation. The hides are not stiff. They bend and breathe with the teepee, letting the structure respond to gusts of wind, yet holding the heat inside. Inside, the floor is layered with a mosaic of furs. Thick buffalo hides form the base, insulating against the frozen earth. Deer and elk hides are laid atop this foundation, creating soft, pliable surfaces for sitting, kneeling, and eventually sleeping. In some teepees, woven mats of reeds or grasses are added, not just for comfort, but as an extra layer of insulation, softening the cold that rises from the ground. The placement of the teepee is deliberate. Native Americans understood the land intimately. They positioned their shelters with the wind in mind, finding natural barriers, a cluster of trees, a small rise in the land, a rocky outcrop that shielded against the harshest gusts. Snow drifts were anticipated, avoided, or embraced depending on the strategy of warmth. In some regions, teepees were built close to one another, allowing for shared heat and communal protection. In others, spacing was strategic, designed to avoid danger or predators, but still preserve the sense of community. At the heart of each teepee sits the fire. It is small but steady, a central source of heat and light. Smoke escapes through the top opening, carefully adjusted to prevent the interior from filling while ensuring the warmth remains. The fire is tended with care, embers added slowly, wood placed in a rhythm that prevents sudden bursts of heat or smoke. The gentle crackle of the flames becomes a constant companion, a soothing rhythm that mirrors the beating of a heart. Every element of the teepee contributes to its ability to shelter its occupants from the cold. Poles, hides, and furs work together with fire, strategic placement, and intimate knowledge of the environment. Even the smallest details matter: the way a flap is closed, the arrangement of stones near the fire, the orientation of the sleeping area relative to the wind. The night stretches quietly across the plains, and the snow reflects a pale, silvery light under the stars. The wind moves gently across the frozen ground, carrying with it the crisp, biting chill of winter. Yet, within the carefully arranged circle of teepees, warmth persists. This is the heart of the Native American village, a sanctuary against the cold. The teepee is a marvel of understanding nature. Its conical form is designed to resist the force of the wind. Each pole, carefully selected for strength and flexibility, forms the skeleton of the shelter. Over this frame, stretched hides form a protective skin. Buffalo hides, deer skins, or sometimes elk, are treated, dried, and layered to provide maximum insulation. The hides are not stiff. They bend and breathe with the teepee, letting the structure respond to gusts of wind, yet holding the heat inside. Inside, the floor is layered with a mosaic of furs. Thick buffalo hides form the base, insulating against the frozen earth. Deer and elk hides are laid atop this foundation, creating soft, pliable surfaces for sitting, kneeling, and eventually sleeping. In some teepees, woven mats of reeds or grasses are added, not just for comfort, but as an extra layer of insulation, softening the cold that rises from the ground. The first step in enduring the bitter cold is clothing. For Native Americans, clothing was far more than protection. It was a carefully considered layer of survival, art, and tradition. The materials were sourced from the land itself. Deer, buffalo, elk, and sometimes smaller animals, their hides prepared and treated to resist the chill. Every garment had purpose: to retain heat, allow movement, and provide comfort through the long, dark hours of winter. Imagine a family preparing for the night. They begin by putting on multiple layers. The innermost layer is soft, often made of tanned deer hide or finely processed furs. These gentle layers sit close to the skin, providing a barrier against the cold without constricting movement. The texture is smooth yet warm, absorbing body heat while letting the skin breathe. Next comes a thicker layer, perhaps a jacket or tunic made of buffalo hide. These hides are dense, heavy, and incredibly insulating. When draped over the inner layers, they trap warmth, creating pockets of air that resist the chill. Moccasins, carefully stitched, keep the feet snug. Their soles are thick enough to shield against frozen ground, yet flexible enough to allow for quiet movement within the village. Gloves and hoods, sometimes lined with fur, protect extremities that are most vulnerable to frost. But clothing alone is not enough. The arrangement of bedding inside the teepee is equally vital. Bedding is layered with intentionality and care. The foundation consists of the thickest hides, laid flat against the cold ground. This is followed by softer furs, carefully arranged to form contours that cradle the body. Smaller hides are tucked inside larger ones, creating a cocoon-like effect. In some cases, dried grasses or soft moss are placed between layers, adding both comfort and insulation. Families slept together, and this was not merely for social or emotional reasons. It was a survival strategy. Bodies generate heat, and by sleeping close together, warmth is shared. Parents wrap children in extra furs, ensuring that even the youngest members of the family were protected from the cold. Pets, too, often slept nearby, contributing their warmth and adding a sense of companionship. The preparation for sleep was slow and deliberate. Each movement was mindful. Furs were smoothed, clothing adjusted, the fire checked one last time. These rituals were as much about physical preparation as they were about mental and emotional readiness. The mind settled as the body was enveloped in layers of warmth. Even the arrangement of the bedding followed principles that had been passed down through generations. Elders would carefully layer furs in a particular order, knowing which would retain heat the longest, which would absorb moisture, and which would provide the softest comfort. The youngest children were placed in the center, the warmest position, while adults on the edges acted as barriers, shielding the center from cold drafts. Sleep itself was an art. In this carefully constructed environment, the body could relax fully. Every layer of hide and fur worked in harmony with the heat radiating from the small fire. The body sank slowly into the softness beneath it, enveloped in warmth. The mind, aware of the safety and preparation, allowed itself to drift into deep, restorative sleep. Night after night, these routines repeated. The textures, the smells, the gentle rustle of hides all became part of the lullaby of survival. Even in temperatures that would have been unbearable without these methods, the cold was kept at bay. The village, quiet under the heavy snow, seemed to pulse with the collective warmth of its in the deepest hours of the night, when the wind howled against the teepee and snow pressed against its walls. The layering of clothing and bedding ensured that the villagers remained safe, warm, and undisturbed. The fire crackled softly, casting shadows across the hides, creating a rhythm that lulled everyone into slumber. The smells of smoke, warmed hides, and herbal oils filled the air, adding comfort to every breath. The clothing and bedding were more than protection. They were a bridge between the harshness of nature and the human need for rest. Each layer, each piece, each careful arrangement was a testament to understanding the environment, respecting the materials provided by the land, and mastering the art of survival. As the night stretched on, the warmth radiated gently from the furs, moving through the layers, filling every corner of the teepee. The bodies beneath them relaxed completely, the mind at ease, the soul comforted by the rhythm of fire, the soft weight of hides, and the steady, shared warmth of family. And so, night after night, the process repeated, layers of clothing, layers of bedding, layers of care. Each night, a different rhythm of wind and snow might brush against the teepee walls, but inside, warmth persisted. The knowledge of preparation, of tradition, and of careful layering created an environment where the cold could not reach, where sleep was deep, and where survival was woven into the very fabric of daily life. In the heart of every Native American teepee, the fire was more than a source of light. It was the lifeblood of warmth, the guardian against the cold, the gentle heartbeat that regulated the rhythm of the night. Without fire, even the softest furs and the thickest hides would not suffice. But fire was not simply kindled, it was understood, respected, and carefully maintained. The preparation for the fire began long before nightfall. Wood was selected with care. Hardwoods, dense and slow burning, were preferred. Twigs, moss, and bark were gathered to kindle the flame, but only in measured amounts. Too much kindling, and the fire would flare uncontrollably, filling the teepee with smoke. Too little, and the cold would seep in before the night could settle. By evening, the fire had reached a steady glow, its warmth radiating outward, touching the furs, the hides, the sleeping mats. The flames danced lightly, casting flickering shadows across the interior, illuminating the subtle textures of the animal hides, the woven mats, and the careful arrangement of bedding. The fire's energy was not wasted. Stones were heated in the flames, absorbing the heat throughout the night. Once glowing, these stones were placed strategically near bedding, under furs, or along the perimeter of the sleeping area. They released their warmth slowly, a gentle pulse of heat that lasted through the darkest, coldest hours. Managing the fire was an art. Native Americans understood the rhythm of the flame, the way wood cracked and hissed as it released moisture and heat. Small pieces of wood were added gradually. Embers shifted to maintain an even glow, and the smoke was allowed to rise naturally, leaving the interior warm but not suffocating. Evening routines included tending to the fire. Children might help carry small sticks, carefully placing them near the embers. Adults would check the stones, adjust the placement of furs, and ensure that the airflow from the top of the teepee was steady. The ritual of maintaining the fire was slow and deliberate, creating a sense of calm that prepared the body and mind for sleep. The fire also played a role in communal life. Families gathered around it, sharing stories, songs, and quiet conversation. The heat encouraged closeness, and the gentle light created a safe cocoon within which the mind could relax. The sound of the crackling wood became a lullaby, soothing and predictable. In particularly bitter winters, multiple techniques were used. Fires might be placed at different points within a larger lodge or clustered tipis, creating zones of warmth. Heated stones could be rotated through the fire before being placed in new positions near bedding, ensuring continuous heat. The interplay between fire, stone, and furs became a sophisticated system, a network of warmth that required attention but rewarded those who understood it. Sleep within the teepee was orchestrated around the fire. People moved slowly, deliberately, laying furs in optimal arrangements relative to the embers. Children were placed closest to the warmth, adults on the edges, pets nestled near stones or fires. Every night, the same careful choreography ensured that warmth was shared, retained, and distributed evenly. Even the smallest sounds, the crack of a stick, the shifting of embers, the sigh of the wind outside, became part of the meditative rhythm of the night. The fire's glow flickered on the walls of the teepee, illuminating gentle movements, a parent adjusting a child's blanket, an elder tending the embers, the subtle rise and fall of breathing bodies in slumber. Over time, the techniques became second nature. Each family knew exactly how much wood to add, when to adjust the stones, how to position furs for optimal heat. This knowledge was passed down through generations, a living tradition of survival. The cold was respected, never ignored, but it could be kept at bay through careful observation, patience, and attentiveness. Imagine lying within the teepee. The fire's warmth radiates gently across the body. The sounds of its crackling merge with the rustle of furs and the quiet breathing of those around you. Outside, snow drifts and winds may rage, but inside, warmth flows continuously. Stones beneath the blankets release heat. The fire glows steadily, and the body sinks deeper into comfort. The fire was also a companion to the mind. Its steady glow, the soft crackle, the smell of wood and smoke, these created a mental space of safety and calm. As the night deepened, eyes grew heavy, breath slowed, and sleep became natural, effortless, uninterrupted. Even in the deepest winter, with temperatures far below freezing, this combination of fire, heated stones, and carefully layered furs created an environment of gentle, persistent warmth. The teepee became a sanctuary, a cocoon in which humans could rest fully, safe and protected. And as night after night repeated, the same rituals, the same care for the fire, the same attention to the distribution of heat created a rhythm that could be repeated endlessly. Fire, furs, warmth, care. A cycle that ensured life continued, even in the most unforgiving winters. The cold of winter was not just fought with furs and fire, it was resisted from within, through nourishment, through warmth that began in the belly and spread like a soft glow through the body. To sleep safely, the body itself needed strength. It needed fuel. And so, before the night settled fully, Native American families prepared food with intention. understanding that warmth began long before eyes closed. As the sun slipped behind the horizon and the snow-covered land grew blue with twilight, a gentle rhythm began within the teepee. Pots were placed near the fire. Stones were shifted to make room for cooking. The scent of simmering meat, rich and earthy, filled the air. Sometimes it was buffalo, sometimes deer or elk. In coastal and river regions it might be fish, smoked earlier in the day or preserved in the cold. They did not eat quickly. A meal at night was calm, unhurried, a slow gathering of warmth. Thick soups were made with broth and wild roots, stews with chunks of meat, marrow bones, and dried vegetables gently softened over the fire. The warmth of these meals filled the chest, spread down the arms, into the fingers, into the legs. On the coldest nights, fat was treasured. Fat provided the most heat, the longest lasting energy. A spoonful of rendered tallow, a strip of dried buffalo fat, or warm bone marrow eaten beside the fire was more than food. It was survival. Warm drinks were just as important. Water was rarely taken cold at night. Doing so could chill the core, slow the heart, and make sleep dangerous in winter. Instead, water was warmed in hide-lined vessels or clay pots over low flames. Sometimes it was infused with fir needles or wild berries, creating a faint tea. Sometimes it was just warmed, plain, simple, but comforting. The first sip was always slow. It spread a quiet heat through the body, calming the muscles, preparing the spirit for rest. After eating, there was still movement. Slow, deliberate, never rushed. Bowls were cleaned, utensils wiped, embers were adjusted. Stones near the edge of the fire were checked to see which were hot enough to place under the furs later. The smallest children, already wrapped in hides, sometimes drifted to sleep beside the fire as the soft hum of adult voices lingered like a lullaby in the space between waking and dreaming. But what truly kept the body warm through the night was not only food or fire or bedding, it was rhythm. The rhythm of preparation, the rhythm of breath, the rhythm of trust in the night. When the body knew it was full, when the mind knew preparations were complete, sleep came easily. Think of a quiet moment after dinner. The fire burns lower now, no longer raging, only glowing. Red embers press against the wood, sighing quietly with each shift of smoke. A pot still rests near the heat, though most of the food has been eaten. The last bit of broth still steams faintly. Outside, the wind has grown colder. It presses against the teepee skin. It whispers through the gaps in the poles. But inside, there is nothing but quiet warmth. The heat from food still lives in the chest. The warmth of drink lingers in the fingertips. The fire reflects soft amber light onto the curved walls of the teepee. Children sleep first. Their faces are peaceful, framed by shadows and the glow of firelight. Tiny breaths rise and fall beneath layers of fur. Their cheeks are flushed with warmth, their hands tucked beneath soft hides. Adults watch them for a while, not out of worry, but from a quiet place of love. Every rise and fall of their breath reminds the elders why the fire was tended, why the animals were hunted, why the shelters were built. After meals, the circulation of heat inside the body is steady. A body that is well fed does not surrender to cold so easily. Proteins and fats break down slowly over the night, providing steady warmth. Warm drinks keep the blood moving gently. The heart beats calmly. Muscles loosen. Fingers and toes remain warm deep into the night. Sometimes soft herbs were placed in bedding to ease breathing or help the body rest. Sage, sweetgrass, cedar, not burned but tucked into furs, subtle, gentle, their scents reminded the sleeper of earth, of open fields and summer. Even while surrounded by snow and ice, the spirit could remember warmth. Now imagine the deeper hours of night. The fire has settled into glowing coals. A few stones still radiate heat beneath the furs. The crackle of cooking has faded. Only the slow breathing of the family fills the space. The warmth from dinner is still inside the body. A steady, gentle heat that makes the cold almost impossible to feel. Food, fire, and furs have worked together, but most importantly, preparation has worked. No one goes to sleep hungry. No one goes to sleep cold. They go to sleep whole. Outside, the stars shimmer in the deep silence. Frost forms on the animal hides of the teepee's outer walls. Tiny crystals sparkle where moonlight touches them. The land is frozen beneath the weight of night. And still, inside, warmth remains. Sometimes, before sleep fully claims them, a soft voice might speak. A story might be shared. A memory of past winters. A tale of ancestors who survived colder nights with fewer comforts. These stories keep the heart warm, even when the body grows still. This is how they slept without freezing. Not because winter was gentle, not because the cold was weak, but because every part of life, food, fire, bedding, storytelling, breath, worked together. Warmth was never accidental. It was created, not in a single moment, but through many small acts. The hunting of animals in autumn, the drying and storing of meat, the gathering of roots and berries, the careful boiling of broth, the pouring of warm water into wooden cups, the laying of stones into the fire, the slow rhythmic eating before rest. Each action was a thread, and together they wove a blanket against the cold. Hours passed like this, silently, gently, a breath, a crackle of ember, a shift of fur, a memory of warmth, and even when the fire becomes only a faint glow, even when the wind rises outside, even when snow presses against the teepee walls, warmth continues within because the body has been fed, the spirit has been calmed, and the night has been honoured. The storm had quieted by dawn, leaving the world wrapped in white silence. Snow covered the earth like a heavy blanket, soft yet merciless, muting every sound except the gentle breath of the wind brushing against the pines. Inside the winter encampment, the fires still burned low. Only the faint orange glow of embers pulsed like the heartbeat of the village. Thin trails of smoke curled up through the smoke holes of the lodges, rising slowly into the pale morning sky. The people awoke quietly, not with alarm, but with the practiced calm of those who had lived through 1,000 winters. Mothers brushed snow from the pelts hanging over the lodge entrances. Warriors stepped out into the cold, their footprints the first to touch the untouched snow. Their breath rose in silver clouds, and their dark hair glistened with tiny frost crystals. Some knelt by the frozen creek, breaking the thin layer of ice with careful hands to gather water. Others fed the fire with splinters of dry wood, saved from seasons before, while elders prayed softly to the spirits of the morning. For them, survival was not a battle. It was a conversation with the earth. They did not shout at the cold or curse the wind. They listened. They watched how the crows flew low to the ground, how the trees groaned softly beneath their icy weight, how the river slowed, but never fully slept beneath its frozen skin. From these signs, they knew what the day would bring. The hunters prepared to follow the tracks of elk deep into the forest. They wrapped their moccasins in extra hide, tied sinew around their leggings to keep the wind from creeping in. Their bows were carried close to their bodies to keep the strings from freezing. Warriors emerged from their lodges soon after, tall, silent figures moving through the snow with slow, deliberate steps. Steam drifted from their mouths as they breathed, curling into the air like the smoke of distant fires. Their hair and fur-lined cloaks shimmered with tiny crystals of frost. They paused, as they always did, and looked to the sky, reading the pale shapes of clouds, the wheeling of ravens, the way the trees stood against the cold. The land spoke without words, and they listened. By the frozen creek, young women knelt on the snow, breaking the surface of the ice with carved bone tools. Beneath the brittle shell, clear water still flowed, slow but living. They dipped hollowed gourds and animal bladders into the dark pool, whispering soft thanks to the spirit of water. Smoke drifting, the slow rhythm of breath, the crunch of snow under moccasins. The village did not wake with noise. It woke with purpose. Fires were fed with dry willow branches collected in warmer seasons. Meat, smoked and preserved, was warmed over coals. Elders sat with blankets wrapped around their shoulders, their hands extended toward the warmth. Their voices murmured ancient words into the air, prayers not asking for an easier path, but for strength to continue walking the hard one. No one fought the winter, they walked with it. The hunters prepared slowly. They wrapped extra hides around their boots. They tied sinew cords around their leggings to keep the cold from creeping in. They checked their bowstrings, rubbing them lightly with animal fat so they would not snap in the brittle air. Their arrows, tipped with stone and bone, were stored beneath their robes to keep the shafts from freezing. Before leaving, each warrior stepped inside the elder's lodge. The flap was held aside, and warm air greeted them like an embrace. Inside, an elder, her hair white as snow, her hands thin but steady, pressed her palm to each hunter's forehead. She did not speak loudly, only breathed a blessing. Walk softly, return with honor. May the land know your footsteps and welcome them back. Outside the walls of the village, the forest stood tall and unmoving. Pine trees, heavy with snow, groaned softly as their branches shifted under the weight. The river beneath the ice made a low humming sound, like a distant drum. Somewhere, a raven called. 3 notes, then silence. The hunters stepped into the wild, one after another, their silhouettes fading into the whiteness. Back in the village, fires were tended by those called the firekeepers, usually older women or skilled apprentices. Their task was to keep the flames alive in every home. They knew which logs burned slow, which sparked too much, which would give smoke that made eyes water. They knew how to place wood so that the fire breathed, not choked. Their hands were darkened by ash, but always warm. Children helped where they could, gathering snow to melt for water, folding blankets, feeding the dogs scraps of dried meat. Their laughter was quiet but bright, like sparks lifting from a flame. The sun climbed higher, though in winter it never rose far. Its light was pale and cold, wandering across the snow and casting long shadows from the lodges. The wind danced softly between the trees, carrying with it the scent of pine, wood smoke, and distant memory. Even in the coldest hours, there was warmth here, not just from fire, not just from fur, but from closeness, from breath shared between loved ones, from footprints leading back home, from songs hummed while mending clothing, from the steady beat of hands shaping snow into blocks to fortify the lodge walls. They did not resist the cold. They learned to sleep in it, to breathe in it, to live inside it, not as prisoners, but as its quiet companions. The day moved quietly across the winterland. The hunters had long disappeared beyond the tree line, their tracks winding into the forest like thin threads stitching the village to the unknown. Their absence left a gentle hush, but not an emptiness, only a pause, like the silence between heartbeats. In the village, life continued in small, careful movements. Inside one of the lodges, an elder sat near the hearth, his wrinkled hands turning a small wooden bowl over a stone, smoothing its edges. The firelight danced across the deep lines of his face. Around him, children gathered, some still wrapped in blankets, others nibbling on thin strips of dried meat. Their eyes were wide, not with fear, but with the quiet curiosity of winter mornings. He began to speak, his voice soft like distant snowfall. Not a story of warriors or battles, but a story of how the people first learned to sleep through winter. He told them how, long ago, before villages stood on this land, men and women wandered with only the stars and the wind as their guides. They carried no fur-lined lodges, no warm fires, only their bodies and their courage. The winter was harsher then, colder, hungrier. Many did not survive. Until, he said, one night the people noticed the fox. It curled beneath fallen pine branches, wrapping its thick tail around its nose. Snow fell on its back, yet it did not shiver. It breathed slowly, its warmth trapped beneath fur and earth and silence. They watched the fox sleep, and the next day they built their shelters the way the fox lay, low to the wind, curved like a nest, sealed tight against snow. From the bear, they learned to layer furs. From the wolf, they learned to sleep side by side, sharing breath and warmth. From the bison, they learned to endure. And so, the elder whispered, brushing ash from the bowl with his thumb, we learned that survival does not come from fighting the cold, but from listening to those who already know how to live inside it. The children said nothing, but their eyes glowed like embers. Outside, the sky shifted, clouds pulling apart just enough to let a fragile sunlight pour through, turning the snow into fields of broken stars. Smoke curled from every lodge, rising into the air like soft grey rivers. Women worked by the fires, scraping hides smooth, their hands moving in slow circles. Each motion brought warmth to their fingers and colour to their cheeks. They hummed low melodies, songs with no words, passed down like breath from mother to daughter. A few young men gathered near the edge of the village to carve wood for new tools. The sound of knives against bark was crisp and rhythmic. Every so often, they paused to warm their hands by a small fire and speak about the hunt, about the elk trails, about the last time the rivers froze this thick. Far beyond them, in the thick woods, the hunters moved like shadows. They followed animal trails through deep snow, past silent trees and frozen streams. The world here was empty of human sound, only the occasional rustle of a ptarmigan, the pop of ice cracking on a distant river, the sigh of wind through tall pines. One hunter knelt beside a track in the snow. Elk, 2 days ahead, not running, just walking. The print was deep, the edges softened by the night's snowfall. He touched the track with his gloved fingers, feeling not the heat of the animal, but the story it left behind. They would not rush. To run would mean sweat, and sweat was death in weather like this. So they walked, breath steady, footsteps spaced. The cold pinched their cheeks and stiffened their eyelashes, but inside their chests warmth remained, held safe beneath layers of fur, skin, and steady heartbeats. Back in the village, the sun was already beginning to sink, though it had only risen a short while ago. Winter days were brief, like a single breath between long hours of darkness. Before the light faded, every person performed their evening tasks. More wood was brought to the lodges, the fires were fed, snow was packed against the lower walls of each home to block out the wind. Children brushed the dog's fur and whispered goodnight into their ears. As the sky deepened from silver to soft blue, then to violet, the first stars appeared, faint at first, then brighter, like eyes opening one by one in the heavens. Soon the world would sleep again, but sleep in these lodges did not mean silence. It meant stories. It meant blankets shared. It meant the soft pop of firewood and the quiet breath of those you loved beside you. And as the last light faded from the sky, one thought moved gently through the hearts of the people, not spoken aloud, but alive in every warm breath. Winter is not something to escape, it is something to pass through, and we do not pass through it alone. Night settled softly over the village, not like a curtain falling, but like a long exhale from the sky. The last hues of twilight faded behind the distant pines, leaving only the deep, endless blue of winter darkness. Stars emerged one by one, scattered across the heavens like grains of salt upon black stone. They shimmered with a cold, ancient light, distant but constant, like the memory of ancestors. Inside the lodges, warmth gathered. Firelight flickered against the hide walls, casting soft golden shadows that moved like spirits dancing to unheard music. The air smelled of burning cedar, warming hides, and simmering broth, a fragrance that clung to skin and hair and memory. People gathered close to the hearth, their breaths quiet, their movements slow. No one spoke loudly. Voices here were gentle, as though every sound had to pass through the hush of snow outside. The hunters had not returned yet, but this brought no fear, only patience. Winter had taught them long ago that time moved differently in the cold, slower, like the frozen rivers, like the heartbeat of the earth beneath the snow. Near the fire, a young mother cradled her baby beneath layers of rabbit fur, the child's small hand curled into her clothing, its breath warm against her chest. She hummed a lullaby that was not meant to be heard clearly, only felt, a song older than words, older than sorrow. An elder sat across from her, slowly feeding thin sticks into the fire. His eyes reflected the flames, steady, quiet, tired, but not weak. When he finally spoke, his voice was like wind over snow, soft, but tracing every ear in the lodge. "Do you hear it?" he asked. For a moment, no one replied. Then a child whispered back, "Hear what?" "The silence," he said. "The earth is listening." And so they listened too. They listened to the snow shifting against lodge walls, settling deeper as the night grew colder. They listened to the muffled howl of a lone wolf far across the plains, calling not in hunger, but in longing. They listened to the crackle of the fire, each spark rising then fading away, like a story told and finished. It was in moments like this, when the world paused, that they remembered the old teachings, that fire is more than flame, that sleep is more than closing one's eyes, that winter is not the enemy, but a test of how well a people can hold each other close. Outside, snow whispered across the land, carried by a soft wind. It drifted against the lodges, building slowly, insulating the walls like nature itself was tucking the village in. Two young apprentices, wrapped in heavy fur robes, walked the perimeter of the camp, checking that no embers or sparks had escaped the fires. They moved with care, brushing snow over old footprints, keeping their torches low to avoid wasting fuel. Their breaths floated like ghosts in the dark. At the center of the village, a large communal fire crackled beneath the open sky. Around it sat a small gathering, elders and those who stayed awake to guard the night. Sparks drifted upward, fading before they could touch the stars. One of the elders leaned forward, stirring the fire with a long stick. The glow lit the deep lines of his face. "Do you know," he said softly, "why we never sleep with our fires completely out?" No one answered. They waited. "Because fire remembers," he continued. "Fire carries the breath of those who came before us. If we let it die, their voices fade with it." He didn't speak to frighten them, only to remind them. The fire was not just warmth. It was memory. It was prayer. It was proof that darkness did not win. Back inside the lodges, sleep finally began to settle. People curled beneath heavy buffalo hides, sharing warmth the way animals did in dens beneath the earth. They lay shoulder to shoulder, breath to breath, the heat of one body becoming the heat of many. Some slept instantly. Others stared at the roof of the lodge, watching faint patterns of light from the flames, thinking of the hunters far away beneath the same stars. A grandmother reached out and lightly touched the hand of the child beside her. "Sleep," she whispered. "The fire is awake for us." Outside, the night deepened, and though the cold tightened its grip on the world, inside the lodges, warmth lived on, steady, unbroken, fragile but enough to last until morning. Morning did not arrive all at once. It came gently, seeping into the world like pale light through a thin veil of frost. The stars faded one by one. The sky shifted from deep blue to soft grey, then to the dim silver of dawn. It was not warm, yet it carried the quiet promise of survival. Frost clung to the roofs of the lodges, turning every curve of hide and wood into a sculpture of ice. Thin trails of smoke rose from each smoke hole, curling upward like breath from sleeping giants. The village was still, calm, held in the silence that always comes before the first stirrings of life. Inside one of the lodges, a fire had burned low, its heart a bed of embers softly glowing beneath white ash. A woman leaned forward, her hands steady despite the cold, placing thin splinters of dry wood into the coals. She exhaled gently, feeding the ember with breath. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, a flicker, a tongue of flame. The fire awakened. Children, curled beneath layered furs, began to stir. Their breath rose in tiny clouds. One rubbed his eyes, the warmth of sleep still clinging to his cheeks. Another reached for his mother's robe, seeking comfort before the day began. The lodge's entrance flap was pushed aside, and a sliver of cold light entered along with a breath of sharp winter air. A hunter stepped in, his boots covered in frost, His shoulders weighted with snow. His face was wind-burned and tired, but his eyes, they were peaceful. He had returned. Others followed not long after, emerging from the distant white like figures from a dream. Their footsteps were slow, not from defeat, but from the deliberate pace of those who have walked miles through deep snow. They carried no words at first, no shouts of triumph, only the calm movements of men who have done what was needed. Over their shoulders hung bundles wrapped in hide, elk meat, carefully divided, small bundles of herbs found beneath snow, and a set of antlers, long and pale, like the fingers of a winter spirit. No one cheered, but every heart breathed easier. Women approached quietly, not with celebration, but with gratitude. They took the meat without haste, bringing it to the fires to thaw and cook. Children watched with wide eyes, glancing from the hunters to the frozen forest beyond the village. One of the hunters knelt beside the fire and rubbed his hands together, thawing the numbness from his fingers. The elder approached him, laying a wrinkled hand over his shoulder. "You returned," he said quietly. The hunter simply nodded. The land allowed it. Outside, the sun struggled to rise higher, casting a pale golden light across the snow. Icicles hanging from lodge poles glittered like strings of glass beads. The forest stood still, watching, listening. The hunter's return set the rhythm of the day. By midday, fires burned steadily in every home. The rich scent of cooking meat drifted through the village, mingling with the crisp smell of snow and pine. Children fed scraps to the dogs, who wagged their tails and pawed gently at the ground. Women scraped hides, softening them into clothing. Elders sat close to the fires, whispering stories that stretched back beyond memory, of winters harsher than this one, of hunts that lasted weeks, of people who survived because their hearts were warm even when the world was not. The sky remained pale, the clouds heavy with the hint of new snow, but for now, the village breathed easier. By late afternoon, the hunters' tools had been repaired and sharpened. Their boughs hung near the fires, drying, their strings stretched and prepared for whatever tomorrow might bring. And as the sun dipped once more toward the horizon, painting the snow with soft amber light, the people gathered in quiet reflection. No celebration, no feast, just warmth shared between souls who knew how fragile life could be in a world of ice. The animals had given their lives. The land had given its mercy. And so the people gave thanks. As night began to fall again, fires burned brighter. More wood was added to each hearth. Blankets were pulled closer. The dogs curled beside the lodge doors, guarding the threshold between warmth and cold. Once again, the stars waited their turn. And once again, the people prepared to sleep, not in fear of the cold, but in quiet acceptance of it. For they knew now, as their ancestors had known for generations, that survival was not found in fighting winter. It was found in living with it. The morning did not arrive with sound, but with light. It crept gently across the horizon, an icy blue glow that pushed away the last embers of the night sky. The stars faded one by one, as though they were being swallowed by the growing frost that lay across the world. Snow blanketed everything, the ground, the tall grass beneath it, even the silent trees whose branches bowed under winter's heavy hand. From the tops of the tipis, Wisps of smoke drifted upward like thin grey feathers, rising into the stillness. Inside one of these teepees, the night's fire had grown soft and low, a cradle of glowing embers that pulsed faintly in the middle of the lodge. A woman with long dark braids sat beside it, wrapped in a cloak of stitched rabbit and deer hides. Her hands moved with quiet certainty as she placed thin sticks over the embers. She'd not blow on the fire. She breathed with it, slowly, patiently. The coals listened. A thin flame licked at the wood, then another, until a small, steady fire came alive. Warmth began to crawl through the teepee. The curved hide walls glowed amber. Shadows moved softly as the flames grew. Around the fire, bundled under layers of buffalo robes, the family began to stir. A child rubbed her eyes, her small hands peeking out from beneath fur blankets. The mother smiled gently and tucked the robe back up to the child's chin. The father rose from his bedding, his breath a cloud in the cold air inside the tipi. He checked the fire, then reached toward a large rounded stone wrapped in hide. The stone was still warm. It had been heated last night in the fire, then wrapped and placed beneath the sleeping furs. He placed it near the fire again to gather heat for the next night. This was how people survived the cold, not with desperation, but with rhythm. Outside, the cold struck like a sharpened blade. The man pushed aside the flap of the teepee and stepped into the frozen morning. The air cut across his face, filling his lungs with cold that burned. His moccasins crunched quietly in the snow. He pulled his buffalo robe tighter around his shoulders and walked toward the horses. Steam rose from their nostrils. Frost rimmed their fur. They turned their heads as he approached, ears twitching, trusting. He brushed the snow from their backs and checked their water, now covered with ice. He cracked the surface and scooped out chunks so the animals could drink. Nearby, two young boys carried small bundles of wood between them, struggling but determined. Their cheeks were red from the cold. They said nothing, but the quiet pride in their movements showed that this task, like the fire, like the stone, was a tradition they would carry into the future. Down by the river, women stood at the frozen bank, their cloaks sweeping the snow like dark wings across the earth. They used long poles to break the ice, each strike sending a sharp crack echoing into the morning air. Beneath the broken surface, the water flowed dark and cold, shimmering like obsidian. They collected it in clay vessels, balancing them with grace as they walked back to the village. Smoke rose thicker now as more fires were awakened inside each home. In the center of the village, the oldest elder, Grandmother Kiona, made her way slowly through the snow. Her steps were small but steady. Each breath left a faint trail in the frigid air. Children followed her, some holding her hands, others walking close by her side as though her warmth extended beyond her skin. They entered her teepee, where the fire danced softly, casting patterns of light across the hides painted with stories. Hunts, storms, buffalo, mountains. The children sat around her as she placed another log on the fire and settled onto a robe beside it. Her eyes, dark and deep as winter earth, reflected the flames as she spoke. "Do you hear the quiet of this morning?" she asked softly. The children nodded, though some were unsure what she meant. "This quiet is the same quiet our ancestors heard 1,000 winters ago, the same breath of wind, the same groaning of ice on the river." She paused, adjusting the robe around her shoulders. "We did not always know how to live in this cold," she continued. "There was a time when the wind broke our shelters and the snow stole our breath. But we learned. We watched the animals, how the wolves slept close together, how the bears dug deep into the earth, how the bison turned their backs to the storm." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "We learned to make fire that does not shout, but breathes. We learned to sleep together, so that no one's heartbeat was alone in the night. And with these things, fire, breath, memory, we stayed." Outside, the sky shifted from pale blue to a gentle wash of gold as the sun climbed. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the clouds, dancing in slow spirals. Warriors prepared their gear: bows, arrows, spears tipped with stone and bone. Their cloaks brushed the snow as they moved toward the edge of the village, where the land stretched far and white. By midday, thin trails of smoke twined through the air, and laughter echoed faintly from where children chased each other across the snow, their footsteps a flurry of soft powder. The day moved slowly, like the river beneath its shell of ice. When evening came, the sun sank behind distant hills, casting a pale purple glow across the plains. The fires inside each teepee grew brighter. Shadows danced along the walls as meat roasted above glowing embers. The smell of sage and wood smoke filled the air. Fresh stones were placed into the fire to heat for the night. Furs were laid thick upon the sleeping ground. Outside, snow fell soundlessly. Inside, the fire breathed warm against the cold that pressed at the hide walls. The cold returned as it always did, but so did the fire. So did the breath of those who slept close together. So did the heartbeat of a people who remembered. And far above, the stars came out again, bright, ancient, unblinking, holding silent watch over the village that rested in the cradle of winter. The sky faded into the muted hues of late afternoon as the cold settled deeper across the land. Long shadows stretched from the pine trees that bordered the village, their needles heavy with ice and snow. The world was quiet, except for the distant groan of frozen river water shifting beneath its surface. Above, grey clouds moved slowly, as if burdened by the weight of the coming night. The village prepared, not with haste, but with a calm certainty shaped by generations of winter. Smoke curled from the tops of the teepees, drifting into the frigid air before dissolving into pale sky. Inside these shelters, fires were fed steadily with long-burning wood, their embers smouldering with controlled warmth that would last until dawn. Hides stretched tightly around the wooden frames of each teepee created walls that held the heat inside and pushed the wind away. Children helped gather the last of the day's firewood, their small footsteps weaving across the snowy path like a pattern only they could see. Their arms wrapped around piles of wood, they carried them inside, where furs were already arranged along the ground, layered thick to guard against the frozen earth. The weight of buffalo hides, elk skins, and thickly woven blankets pressed down like a familiar embrace, sealing warmth inside the lodge. At the edge of the settlement, the horses shifted subtly in their pens. Their bodies steamed faintly in the evening light as their breath rose in clouds that disappeared almost instantly. Their backs were covered with wool blankets and hides, protecting them from the biting wind. Snow gathered along their hooves, their tails flicking gently as one by one they lowered their heads to rest. Farther out, The river lay beneath a shell of ice that gleamed faintly in the twilight. Trees clustered near its banks, black silhouettes against the softening sky. A thin mist clung low to the surface of the frozen water, curling around the reeds and brush like something alive. Within the village, the rhythm of evening deepened. Meat that had been drying through the day was taken down carefully, carried inside to be stored or shared. The scent of cooking fat and smouldering sage filled the air around each shelter. Stones that had been heated in the fire were lifted with sticks, wrapped in hide, and placed beneath the bedding. Their warmth spread slowly, a steady pulse that reached through the layers of fur to touch the skin. Children, bundled in rabbit skin robes and soft deerskin clothing, carried small armfuls of firewood from the stacked piles outside to their homes, their boots leaving temporary prints in the softening snow. Their cheeks glowed from the cold as they climbed into the shelter of the lodge, disappearing into the amber warmth inside. Closer to the river, snow-covered paths traced the movement of those gathering water. The ice at the river's edge had thickened overnight, clear and hard, reflecting the dim light of the sky. Beneath it, dark water still flowed, unseen but heard in faint muffled currents. The water vessels, carved from clay and shaped smooth by use, were filled with care and lifted slowly, so as not to spill a precious drop. Each vessel was carried back through the cold, pressed against warm hides to keep the contents from freezing before reaching the fire. The horses stood quietly in their enclosure near the edge of the village. Their breath rose in heavy, white clouds that vanished almost as soon as they appeared. Snow clung to their manes and backs, and their long hair protected their legs from the sting of ice. Blankets of woven wool and tanned hide lay across their backs. Their ears twitched at the sound of footsteps, but their bodies remained calm, trusting in the humans who moved among them with slow, gentle motions. The scent of hay, frost, and winter grass mingled with the cold air. Throughout the village, preparations for night continued. Animal skins were shaken free of snow and hung near the fires to dry. Dried meat, preserved in the chill air outside, was brought in to soften near the coals. Tools were checked, knives sharpened, bows inspected, sinew warmed so it would not snap in the cold. Even the smallest objects, carved bone needles and bone awls, were kept close to the fire, safe from winter's bite. The sky shifted again as the sun sank below the horizon. A band of deep purple spread across the west, fading into indigo and the first faint stars of night. The cold deepened. The trees stood motionless, branches stiff and silent beneath a heavy coat of frost. No breeze stirred. Frost flowers formed on exposed rocks along the riverbank, delicate crystalline structures that glimmered briefly in the last traces of light. Inside the teepees, the fires were renewed. Logs were placed carefully over glowing embers, sparks rising for a moment before settling back into the hearth. Fresh stones were arranged close to the flames, absorbing heat that would be carried into the blankets once the darkness was complete. Buffalo hides thickened the ground, layered upon each other to block the chill that seeped from frozen earth. Furs of coyote, wolf, and elk were spread across sleeping areas, soft and heavy. One by one, the sounds of day fell silent. The distant chatter of children faded. The crack of ice at the river quieted. The rhythmic brushing of horsetails ceased. A stillness took hold, deep and ancient, the kind that belonged only to winter nights. Above the village, the sky expanded into darkness. Stars appeared like scattered embers, thousands of them, cold and silent. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens, a pale river of light reflecting the frozen river far below. The moon, thin and sharp, began its climb, casting faint silver light across the snow. The tipis shone softly beneath it, ghostly shapes rising from the white earth, their shadows long and unmoving. In each shelter, families lay close, bodies tucked against one another beneath heavy hides. The fire, now low and quiet, glowed like a heartbeat at the center of each home. Heated stones warmed the bedding from below. The breath of sleepers formed clouds that faded into the gentle warmth around them. Outside, the cold pressed against hide walls, against snow and stone, but could not enter. The land slept beneath the weight of winter. The silence was not empty. It was full of breath, of memory, of fire quietly enduring. And though frost gathered on every surface, though the world seemed carved from ice and shadow, warmth remained, held in the center of each lodge, in the steady sleeping breath of a people who understood the cold and did not fear it. Night settled completely over the plains, and the village lay beneath a cloak of stillness. The stars shone cold and unwavering, casting a pale shimmer across the snow that blanketed the land. The moon had risen higher now, its faint light spilling over the tops of the tipis, tracing their rounded shapes in silver. Each lodge stood like a silent guardian against the dark, their hides gently stirring with the movement of wind and smoke from within. The wind began to move again, slowly at first, curling across the river valley like a creature waking from sleep. It brushed against the pine trees, whispering through their frozen needles, then swept over the open ground. Snowflakes drifted through the air, not falling from clouds, but lifted from the ground itself, carried in twisting silent spirals. The cold was sharper now, deep and unforgiving, seeping into the stones of the earth and the frozen river that lay motionless beneath its crust of ice. Within each tipi, a soft orange glow pulsed from the central fire. Flames burned low, no longer leaping, but resting in steady embers that radiated a slow, enduring warmth. The hides of the lodges held the heat inside like cupped hands, and the scent of burning wood, sage, and smoked meat clung to the air. Heated stones pulled from the fire earlier lay wrapped beneath blankets and robes where families slept. They released their warmth gradually, keeping the cold at bay, even as the fires settled to their quiet heartbeats of light. Sleeping forms lay beneath layers of fur and hide, buffalo robes thick and heavy, wolf pelts soft against the skin, elk hides stretched beneath as mattresses to block the frozen ground. Bodies curled close together, breath rising and falling in the darkness. The warmth created by their closeness filled the space more deeply than any flame. Above them, the smoke hole at the top of the tipi framed the night sky, a dark circle cut into the stars. Thin tendrils of smoke drifted through it, disappearing into the wind. Beyond the village, the world expanded in empty silence. Snow-covered hills rolled like frozen waves beneath the moonlight. The river lay still, its surface white and glassy, with cracks forming faint patterns beneath the surface. The trees that lined its banks stood motionless, branches thick with frost, their shadows long and unmoving on the snow. A lone owl glided silently between the trees, wings spread wide, feathers muffling every motion. It drifted above the roofs of the sleeping village, its eyes bright and watching. Farther away, a pack of wolves moved across the distant hills, their shapes barely visible against the snow. Their paws left a scattered trail that slowly filled with drifting powder. They did not approach the village. They knew the scent of humans, fire, and smoke, but their presence pressed against the edge of the land like a distant rhythm. Inside the lodges, the fires remained alive. Even as they dimmed, they did not die. Dry wood had been chosen carefully to burn for hours without sound or smoke. The coals smouldered deep, protected beneath ash, glowing like buried suns. Occasionally, one would shift, releasing a faint crackle that echoed softly in the quiet. The hides of the walls trembled slightly whenever the wind pressed against them, then settled again. Time moved slowly through the night. The stars wheeled overhead in their vast, unchanging paths. Frost thickened along the edges of tipi poles, forming delicate crystals that glittered like tiny stars of their own. The snow in untouched places remained smooth and soft, a perfect white field that held the memory of no footprints. Hours passed. The fires softened further, but never faltered. The stones beneath the bedding cooled gradually, though their warmth still lingered. The air within the lodges turned cool, but not biting, held steady by the insulation of hide walls and the collective breath of those sleeping inside. The world outside grew colder still, the cold so deep it seemed to quiet even the wind. Somewhere in the distance, ice shifted along the river with a low groan, then fell still again. A fox trotted along the edge of the tree line, nose pressed to the snow, its coat thick against the cold. It paused, listening, then vanished into the shadows. Stillness returned. The night reached its deepest point, a silent space suspended between dusk and dawn, and held the village in its embrace. No voices, no movement, only the constant quiet of winter, the slow breathing of fire, and the pulse of life beneath fur and hide. Far above, the first pale suggestion of morning waited beyond the horizon, unseen but approaching. And still, the fires glowed. Snow continued to fall outside, soft and unhurried, like drifting feathers from the wings of unseen birds. The village lay quiet under its white mantle, only the faint glow from teepee dwellings breaking the darkness. Each shelter pulsed gently with warmth, like breathing creatures resting against the cold. Inside these circles of hide and willow, the winter night unfolded with patience, and life held on to its quiet rhythm. Within one of these dwellings, firelight whispered across the curved walls. The embers no longer leapt into tall flames. Instead, they glowed deep red and orange, like the beating heart of the earth itself. Stones that had spent hours heating in the flames now sat buried beneath layers of soil, fur, and woven mats, radiating a deep, constant heat from below. Above them, thick robes of bison hide rested upon sleeping mats made of willow branches and dried grass, trapping warmth close to the skin. No words were spoken. None were needed. Warm breath drifted into the air before vanishing like mist. Beyond the shelter, the wind moved through the trees, bending pine boughs under the weight of snow. The stars above the clouds waited in silence. In this season, even the animals rarely stirred. Only the quiet pad of a lone fox passed by the edge of camp, its paws making no sound over the snow. Winter did not roar here, it pressed inward with a soft persistence, testing every living thing with its cold patience. But inside, the people were prepared. They had long understood that warmth did not come from fire alone. It came from the way the teepee was built, its circular shape turning the wind aside, its hide coverings layered and tightened, its seams sealed with fat and sinew to keep the cold from creeping in. The fire was placed at the center, where smoke rose through the adjustable opening at the top, guided by the wind. Around this flame, life was arranged in careful order. Sleeping spaces in the warmest portion of the floor, tools and weapons stored away from drafts, herbs and dried plants hanging near the smoke to keep them preserved. As the embers dimmed, someone would rise before they froze, adding another piece of dried wood or gently stirring the coals to coax heat back to the living surface. Care was taken not to let the fire flare too high, for too much smoke would choke the air, and too little heat would let frost creep beneath their robes. It was a balance learned not across days or seasons, but across generations. Outside, the snow deepened, muffling every sound. The drifts leaned against the walls of the tipi, sealing in warmth even further. The village resembled a cluster of sleeping giants, each wrapped in white blankets, their breath rising slowly into the night sky. No lanterns flickered, no footsteps broke the hush, only the occasional crack from inside a fire pit, the low rumble of logs shifting in their own warmth. In another shelter across the camp, elders slept beside the west wall, the place of honor and rest. Their breathing was shallow but strong. They had seen countless winters, each one different in its arrival, but alike in its challenge. They had taught the younger ones how to survive, to dry their moccasins near the fire before sleep, to warm stones and wrap them in cloth to place at their feet, to eat warm broth so that the cold could not sink deeply into their bones during the night. These teachings were no longer spoken aloud. They were seen in every movement, every quiet gesture before sleep, the careful way a robe was placed to block a draft, the slow, rhythmic shifting of coals to preserve heat, the way two siblings slept back to back, sharing warmth beneath a single heavy hide. Each small act was a thread in a greater tapestry of survival. Far above, the clouds parted for a moment, revealing the stars. They cast pale silver across the land, turning the snow into a field of frozen light. No one inside the shelters saw it, but they did not need to. They felt it in the air, the quiet blessing of the night sky, watching over them as they dreamed. Morning was still distant. The deepest part of night held the village softly in its grip, yet the people slept not in fear of the cold, but in acceptance of it. They did not resist winter. They lived within it, beside it, beneath it. Their warmth was born from harmony, not from struggle, and so the night continued, inching forward like a slow river beneath ice. Embers breathed, hides rustled, and sleep came gently to those who had prepared their hearts and homes for the whispering cold. Through the long hours of the night, warmth and cold continued their silent exchange. Firelight remained low and gentle inside the teepees, never rising to disturb the darkness, never falling enough to let the frost creep over sleeping shapes. Outside, the wind settled, as if the world itself had chosen to rest. Snowflakes drifted soundlessly, piling in soft dunes against hides and lodge poles, forming silver mounds across the still camp. The people slept in layers of fur and wool, bundled close together beneath the arched ribs of willow that formed their shelter's spine. their sleep was not deep, but steady, an ancient rhythm learned from generations who had watched countless winters come and go. One by one, their breaths mingled with the faint smoke overhead, curling slowly through the roof vent and disappearing into the white sky. The coals beneath the ash still glowed. Each ember was a memory of flame, a quiet endurance. Before sleep had taken them, the last keeper of the fire had pressed warm stones deep into the soil pits layered beneath furs and grass bedding, sealing in heat that would last until morning. Even now that warmth pulsed through the ground, rising like a slow heartbeat through the earth itself. It made the air just warm enough to soften the bite of winter, to keep skin from stiffening and breath from freezing at the edge of the lips. Around the village, everything was still. Trees stood buried in white, their branches bending under the cold weight. Smoke from a few shelters drifted into the dawn air in thin, crooked lines, rising only to vanish into grey. Foxes and elk had already taken shelter. Even the rivers, once flowing with restless motion, lay covered in glassy ice, silent beneath a world of snow. Inside the lodges, the world breathed differently. The cold had not been defeated, only balanced, held at a careful distance by skin, hide, ember, and memory. Above, herbs hung from wooden poles, dried roots and medicine plants, stored near the smoke to keep them safe from mold and freezing. Leather tools rested near the wall, stitched carefully before nightfall, so no sharp edge could become brittle in the cold. The silence was full, not empty, filled with the soft exhale of sleepers, the steady hum of burning coals, the whisper of snow shifting on canvas. In this silence, life endured with grace, without alarm or panic. The people had learned that survival was not loud, it was quiet, thoughtful, patient. In the farthest tipi, close to where the pines thickened into forest, a small bundle of hides shifted. Someone awoke, not with urgency but with instinct. They knelt beside the fire pit, moving slowly so as not to disturb those sleeping near the warmth. Using a carved stick, they gently parted the ash and revealed the hidden red glow beneath. A pinch of dry wood, gathered in the morning and kept near the wall to avoid frost, was placed softly atop the embers. No spark jumped, no flame roared. Instead, a soft orange light spread through the dry fibers, and warmth began to breathe again. They waited until the fire had grown, just enough, then settled back beneath their robe of fur. The task was done. The balance was preserved. Outside, the land waited for dawn. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, light began to gather behind the horizon. It did not rise quickly, nor did it bring warmth. Instead, it brought the faintest silver, like the first touch of breath on frozen glass. Shadows lengthened softly. The light crept across the snow, revealing the curves of buried stones, the outlines of sleeping lodges, the delicate tracks of night animals. Frost sparkled on every surface, crystalline and fragile. The world seemed to hold itself perfectly still, as though afraid that the slightest sound might shatter the quiet beauty of morning's first breath. Inside one shelter, a child shifted in their sleep, unconsciously pulling the fur closer. Their breath brushed the air like a cloud, then dissolved into the dimness. The fire beside them glowed a little more brightly, casting soft orange patterns along the curved walls. A pot of melted snow water hung above the coals, warming slowly for the morning meal. Its steam rose in faint strands, carrying the scent of pine ash and earth. This was how they endured, not with force, not with resistance, but with understanding. They knew how to listen to the winter, how to answer it quietly, layer by layer, breath by breath, through fire and stone and memory. And so, as dawn approached and the sky lightened from black to charcoal to the softest blue, the village remained wrapped in warmth. No one rushed to rise. The cold outside was vast, patient, and eternal, but they were ready. They had been ready for countless generations. The night drew its final breath. The first pale light of morning touched the tips of the lodge poles. Winter, silent and watching, allowed them another day. The first light of morning crept gently across the frozen land, though the sun itself remained hidden beneath the horizon. A muted silver glow drifted through the eastern sky, casting a faint shimmer over the blanket of snow that covered the valley. Nothing stirred. Even the wind seemed to pause, as though winter itself was holding its breath, listening for the sound of life returning. Within the village, each tipi stood still and silent, their smoke holes faintly open to allow the slow sigh of warmth to escape into the icy dawn. Frost clung to their outer hides, glimmering like crushed stars. Drifts of snow leaned against their walls, nature's own insulation, shielding each shelter from the piercing cold. Inside one of these lodges, the embers from the night's fire still glowed beneath a mound of ash. Their warmth, though small, was steady and alive. The stones heated in the fire hours before still radiated a quiet heat from beneath layers of earth and hide, keeping the sleeping forms above them warm through the coldest hours of night. Fur robes rustled softly as bodies shifted in sleep, some curled beside one another, others facing the fire with faces half hidden beneath thick coverings of bison or elk hide. There was no hurry to rise. Morning in winter was not greeted with ceremony, but with patience. To wake too quickly was to invite the cold into the bones, so the village lingered in its cocoon of warmth and stillness, allowing the fire to pulse gently, allowing the world to brighten on its own. Smoke curled quietly through the opening above the fire pit, trailing upward in thin lines that twisted into the pale morning air. Above the roof poles, the sky began to blush with faint colour, soft grey giving way to muted rose, like the first stirrings of warmth beneath frosted skin. Across the village, in another shelter, a caretaker of the fire stirred. Their movements were measured, careful not to disturb those still resting. With a carved stick, they brushed aside the ash in the centre of the pit and revealed the red heart beneath. Dried willow twigs stored near the wall before nightfall were placed upon it. The embers welcomed them silently, touching them with heat until thin ribbons of smoke rose once more. No crackle, no flare, just a quiet, growing glow. Outside, frost had formed delicate patterns on every surface, spirals on stretched hides, lattices on branches, crystalline dust upon stones. The air was motionless, sharp as glass, ready to bite exposed skin, but also breathtaking in its beauty. In the trees beyond the village, the weight of icy snow bent the firs, each needle encased in white. Soon, the faint sound of water simmering could be heard within some lodges. Pots of melted snow rested near the fire, slowly becoming warm enough to drink. The scent of dried herbs, sage, cedar, spruce tips began to drift softly into the air, as they were sprinkled into the water or laid near the coals to release their oils. Still, no words were spoken. Silence remained the language of mourning. Quiet movements, small gestures, the rhythm of breath and fire. A child's fur blanket shifted as they turned in their sleep. An elder's hands remained wrapped in hide, resting peacefully upon their chest, unwavering even in dreams. Beyond the shelters, the first bird of morning stirred in the trees. A single, soft flutter of wings that broke the perfect stillness, yet somehow belonged to it. Snow loosened from a branch and fell silently, sending glittering powder into the air that caught the pale light like drifting ash. This was how the day began in winter, not with noise, not with haste, but with reverence. A slow awakening, a conversation between fire and frost, hide and wind, earth and sky. For these people, survival was not an act of defiance against the cold, but a partnership with the land. The winter did not need to be fought, it needed only to be understood. So as the light strengthened, casting silver across the snow and touching the tops of the lodge poles, life stirred quietly within the village. The day had begun. The fire was alive. The cold waited outside, but it found no fear within these walls. Only warmth, only breath, only the steady heartbeat of a people who had learned how to sleep through winter without ever surrendering to it. The sun had not yet touched the earth, but the sky was slowly opening to morning. A pale glow stretched above the horizon, like a thin thread of light drawn across the cold sky. The village remained still beneath its blanket of frost and snow, each tipi breathing faint wisps of smoke into the frozen air. No footsteps marked the ground outside. Overnight snowfall had filled every path, every imprint, smoothing the land into untouched white. The world looked new, as though no one had ever walked upon it. Inside the shelters, warmth clung to the air in gentle layers. The fire in each lodge was not bright, but alive, glowing softly beneath ash, waiting for hands to stir it back into strength. The stones that once sat in those flames were still warm beneath the earth and hides, radiating heat upward through the sleeping mats. The people rested in silence, their breaths slow and even, their bodies wrapped in thick robes of fur and woven blankets. The walls of the teepee continued to hold that warmth carefully. Thick hides, sewn tightly and reinforced by inner layers of bark and grass, stopped the wind before it could creep inside. Snow packed around the lower edges acted like the soil of a winter den, keeping the warmth from leaving and the cold from entering. These snowbanks were not obstacles but shields, a natural gift of the storm. In the center, embers breathed softly, tiny sparks appearing and fading like distant stars. Above them, the smoke hole sat partly open, its flaps angled according to the wind's direction. A quiet calculation made every evening to guide smoke away, but keep heat within. The balance between warmth and air was delicate, learned through winter after winter. As the light grew faintly stronger, someone in the camp rose from sleep, not suddenly, not hurriedly, but with the calm of someone who understood the morning. They sat near the fire pit, letting their hands rest just above the gentle heat coming from the stones below. Then, with a small motion, they reached for a piece of wood, dry and light, and placed it gently upon the embers. Slowly, the flame returned, not in a rush, but like a breath remembered. Warmth expanded, shadows shifted across the curved inner walls. The smell of pine smoke drifted through the air, clean and familiar, Around the village, life remained quiet. Dogs lay curled near the entrances of the lodges, their fur thick with winter growth, their bodies tucked into circles to save heat. Their ears twitched only slightly at the awakening of the fire. They too knew that in winter, movement was precious and stillness was strength. Far beyond the village, the trees held their breath. Pine needles wore thin coats of frost. Branches sagged under weight but did not break. The river beneath the ice whispered faintly, moving unseen under its frozen prison, persistent even through the hardest cold. Within the shelters, the first tasks of morning unfolded. Snow was melted in shallow pots, slowly turning to water for drinking and warming chilled hands. Dried berries and thin slices of smoked meat were warmed near the coals before being eaten in shared silence. No words disturbed the air. The people did not speak until the sun touched the tops of the trees or the smoke began to turn gold in its light. This quiet was not emptiness. It was respect for the morning, for the land, for the fire that kept them alive. Each movement, each breath, was part of a rhythm older than any story. Outside, a soft breeze rose, stirring loose powder from the trees and sending it into the air in a fine mist. The snowflakes glittered briefly, catching the faint sunlight breaking across the horizon. The world shimmered, cold, silent, breathtaking, and yet, within the lodges, there remained a core of warmth, small but enduring. It was the kind of warmth carried not just by fire, but by memory, by tradition, by hands that knew how to arrange stone and hide and embers so that life could continue, even when the world outside lay silent beneath its frozen veil. This was how they survived, not through defiance of winter, but through understanding its silence and learning how to sleep within it. Morning light continued its slow arrival, not with brilliance, but with a hushed silver that gently touched the horizon. The sun had not yet climbed over the distant hills, but its promise glowed faintly in the sky, a muted softness spreading across the pale world. Frost clung to the tips of lodge poles, making them shimmer faintly against the dim light. Smoke lingered in the cold air above each tipi, rising only briefly before dissolving into whiteness. The camp did not rush to greet the day. Winter mornings were not for haste. They were for preservation, for quiet, for careful tending of life. Inside the lodges, the air held the warmth of the night. Sleeping forms lay beneath thick robes of fur, bison hide lined with wool, deerskin softened and layered, rabbit pelts stitched together in quilt-like warmth. Beneath them, beds of woven reeds and dry grasses insulated their bodies from the frozen ground. Beneath that, stones still faintly warm from last evening's fire radiated a subtle heat, spreading upward like a low and steady heartbeat. Around the fire pit, the last of the red embers lay hidden beneath pale ash. They were small, but alive, waiting, patient. The shelter breathed softly, its hide walls curving gently inward, holding the warmth and pushing away the cold. Beyond those walls, winter watched silently. The forest stood motionless beneath its frost. Pine branches sagged under the night snow, each needle glazed in ice. The river slept beneath a thick crust of frozen white, yet beneath that silent surface, unseen waters still moved, slow, dark, enduring. The people had long understood that survival in such silence was not a battle. It was a rhythm, an agreement between fire and frost, between breath and snow. And so, as the faint light grew, Someone rose in the shelter, not to break the stillness, but to tend it. They reached toward the coals, brushing away the ash just enough to expose the red glow beneath. With practiced calm, they placed dried moss and thin wood slivers upon the embers. The fire did not surge. It bloomed slowly, a quiet unfurling of warmth. Orange flickers stretched across the stone ring, painting gentle shadows on the hide walls. Smoke rose upward to the teepee's opening, drawn by the slightest draught. The flaps at the top had been aligned before sleep, positioned according to the wind so that smoke would escape, but chilling air would not intrude. That small adjustment, based on intuition, wind direction, and experience, had meant the difference between comfort and cold. Once the flame was stable, snow was scooped from a covered container and placed into a pot above the fire. As it melted, it released faint wisps of steam, carrying the scent of pine and iron. This water would warm stomachs, soften dried food, and heat chilled fingers. Gradually, movement stirred in other lodges. Soft rustles of fur, faint crackling of wood, the whisper of coals waking to light. Dogs rose from their curled positions, stretching limbs stiff from sleep, their breaths forming clouds in the cold air near the entrances. Still, silence held. Not a single spoken word, only rhythm. The snow outside remained untouched, each teepee surrounded by smooth white that rose gently against its walls. The wind had not come during the night, and so no patterns were carved in the snow, only the soft, natural curves formed by falling flakes. The village seemed made of the earth itself, rooted, breathing, alive. The sky brightened to pale grey blue. At the horizon, the first edge of the sun began to appear, weak, distant, filtered by winter mist. Its light brushed the tops of trees and set the frost glowing like powdered glass, but it did not bring warmth. Not yet. Inside, the people understood. The true warmth of morning did not come from the sun in winter. It came from the fire, from the layered hides, from the shared nearness of bodies conserving heat. It came from the knowledge carried through generations, when to wake, when to move, how to breathe in the cold without letting it reach the heart. Soon, more snow would be melted, more embers stirred. The day's tasks would begin. Slow gathering of wood, careful mending of clothing, drying of herbs by the fire. But for now, the village remained wrapped in the stillness beneath the ice. Nothing hurried. Nothing spoke. Only the land and the shelters and the fires, all breathing in unison. The morning stretched across the village like liquid silver, soft and unhurried. Light crept along the snow, illuminating every ridge, every curve, every frost-encrusted surface. Teepees rested quietly, their smoke holes exhaling faint tendrils into the crisp air. Even the fire, now steady, seemed to breathe in time with the wind, though the wind itself had softened to a gentle whisper across the plains. Inside each shelter, the warmth remained constant, layered and dense. Heated stones embedded beneath the floor sent waves of heat upward, touching the bodies of sleepers curled in furs. Buffalo hides, soft and thick, were layered over woven mats, their weight a protective barrier against the cold that pressed against the outer walls. Rabbit pelts, elk skins, and smaller furs were draped carefully to close gaps, creating pockets of warmth that never faltered. Outside, the frost sparkled like countless tiny crystals. Each tree branch, each exposed stone, each frozen blade of grass carried the memory of night, shining in the pale light. The river, though frozen solid at its edges, carried a deep, hidden current beneath, moving slowly and silently, its surface reflecting the sky like a sheet of polished glass. Even the animals kept to their own rhythm. The fox paused at the tree line, ears alert, tail curled around its body. The distant elk herd moved slowly across the horizon, their breath rising in clouds that shimmered faintly before dissolving into the cold air. Within the lodges, the first stirring of day was quiet and deliberate. Hands brushed over embers, coaxing them to life with careful, measured motions. The soft crackle of wood joining coals sounded like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Water, carried from melted snow, warmed slowly above the flames, rising in thin wisps of steam that mingled with the smoke and scent of pine. Dried meat and berries were gently heated near the fire, preserved for those who would awaken fully later. Their first nourishment, a careful balance of warmth and sustenance. The people moved with patience, each gesture purposeful and without urgency. There was no need to rush. The cold outside demanded respect, not confrontation. Every act, from arranging bedding to stirring coals, from tending water to shifting heated stones beneath hides, was part of a slow, ancient rhythm. It was the rhythm that had been passed down through generations, the knowledge that survival in winter was not a matter of haste, but of careful timing, of harmony, of attention to the smallest details. Above, the sky shifted subtly. Clouds, thin and pale, parted just enough to reveal the faint gleam of the sun's edge. Its light was weak, but steady, brushing the snow with a sheen of silver and illuminating the patterns of frost that had formed overnight. The village, seen from above, resembled a cluster of faint, glowing embers, each lodge a quiet refuge in the vast expanse of white. Even the smallest creatures followed the rhythm. Birds took tentative flight between trees, their wings stirring frozen air, while smaller mammals slipped along snow-packed trails, careful to avoid open spaces. Every movement, no matter how tiny, was measured and deliberate, an echo of the patience that governed the human dwellings below. And still, inside the lodges, warmth persisted. The fire remained steady, breathing slowly as if it were aware of the lives it sustained. Furs and hides absorbed the heat, radiating it upward, creating an invisible shield against the frost that pressed against the outer walls. Even when the wind rose again, carrying flakes of snow across the plains, it could not penetrate the careful design, the centuries of understanding embedded in every tip of every lodge. This was the essence of winter survival. Not struggle, not panic, not noise, but harmony. It was the quiet understanding that fire, stone, hide, and breath could work together to hold life against the frozen world. It was patience, foresight, and reverence for the cold, all working in concert to allow the villagers to endure through night after night, storm after storm, frost after frost. The morning deepened, yet the village remained cocooned in its careful balance. Time moved slowly, measured in the pulse of fire, the rise of steam, the soft exhalations of those sleeping beneath layered furs. Beyond the walls, frost sparkled, snow drifted, and the earth waited quietly for the sun to gain strength. Within, life continued undisturbed, steady, deliberate, enduring. Winter held the land in silence, and yet within that silence, there was warmth, rhythm, and the steady heartbeat of survival. The morning stretched across the village like liquid silver, soft and unhurried. Light crept along the snow, illuminating every ridge, every curve, every frost-encrusted surface. Tipis rested quietly, their smoke holes exhaling faint tendrils into the crisp air. Even the fire, now steady, seemed to breathe in time with the wind, though the wind itself had softened to a gentle whisper across the plains. Inside each shelter, the warmth remained constant, layered and dense. Heated stones embedded beneath the floor sent waves of heat upward, touching the bodies of sleepers curled in furs. Buffalo hides, soft and thick, were layered over woven mats, their weight a protective barrier against the cold that pressed against the outer walls. Rabbit pelts, elk skins, and smaller furs were draped carefully to close gaps, creating pockets of warmth that never faltered. Outside, the frost sparkled like countless tiny crystals. Each tree branch, each exposed stone, each frozen blade of grass carried the memory of night, shining in the pale light. The river, though frozen solid at its edges, carried a deep, hidden current beneath, moving slowly and silently, its surface reflecting the sky like a sheet of polished glass. Even the animals kept to their own rhythm. The fox paused at the tree line, ears alert, tail curled around its body. The distant elk herd moved slowly across the horizon, their breath rising in clouds that shimmered faintly before dissolving into the cold air. Within the lodges, the first stirring of day was quiet and deliberate. Hands brushed over embers, coaxing them to life with careful, measured motions. The soft crackle of wood joining coals sounded like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Water, carried from melted snow, warmed slowly above the flames, rising in thin wisps of steam that mingled with the smoke and scent of pine. Dried meat and berries were gently heated near the fire, preserved for those who would awaken fully later. Their first nourishment, a careful balance of warmth and sustenance. The people moved with patience, each gesture purposeful and without urgency. There was no need to rush. The cold outside demanded respect, not confrontation. Every act, from arranging bedding to stirring coals, from tending water to shifting heated stones beneath hides, was part of a slow, ancient rhythm. It was the rhythm that had been passed down through generations, the knowledge that survival in winter was not a matter of haste, but of careful timing, of harmony, of attention to the smallest details. Above, the sky shifted subtly. Clouds, thin and pale, parted just enough to reveal the faint gleam of the sun's edge. Its light was weak but steady, brushing the snow with a sheen of silver and illuminating the patterns of frost that had formed overnight. The village, seen from above, resembled a cluster of faint, glowing embers, each lodge a quiet refuge in the vast expanse of white. Even the smallest creatures followed the rhythm. Birds took tentative flight between trees, their wings stirring frozen air, while smaller mammals slipped along snow-packed trails, careful to avoid open spaces. Every movement, no matter how tiny, was measured and deliberate, an echo of the patience that governed the human dwellings below. And still, inside the lodges, warmth persisted. The fire remained steady, breathing slowly as if it were aware of the lives it sustained. Furs and hides absorbed the heat, radiating it upward, creating an invisible shield against the frost that pressed against the outer walls. Even when the wind rose again, carrying flakes of snow across the plains, it could not penetrate the careful design, the centuries of understanding embedded in every tip of every lodge. This was the essence of winter survival. Not struggle, not panic, not noise, but harmony. It was the quiet understanding that fire, stone, hide, and breath could work together to hold life against the frozen world. It was patience, foresight, and reverence for the cold, all working in concert to allow the villagers to endure through night after night, storm after storm, frost after frost. The morning deepened, yet the village remained cocooned in its careful balance. Time moved slowly, measured in the pulse of fire, the rise of steam, the soft exhalations of those sleeping beneath layered furs. Beyond the walls, frost sparkled, snow drifted, and the earth waited quietly for the sun to gain strength. Within, life continued undisturbed, steady, deliberate, enduring. Winter held the land in silence, and yet within that silence there was warmth, rhythm, and the steady heartbeat of survival. The day advanced slowly, though its progress was nearly imperceptible beneath the heavy winter sky. Light had grown slightly stronger, yet it remained soft, pale, filtered through clouds and frost. The village rested beneath a blanket of white, each lodge a quiet heart of warmth amid the frozen expanse. Smoke spiraled upward from the central fires, moving like ghostly ribbons toward the sky before fading into the icy air. Inside each teepee, the balance between heat and cold persisted like a living rhythm. Heated stones still radiated gentle warmth from beneath the bedding, touching bodies curled beneath layers of fur. Buffalo hides, soft and thick, covered woven mats, while smaller pelts were tucked around sleeping forms, forming protective walls of warmth. Even as the chill pressed against the outer hides, the cold could not penetrate. Each lodge was an insulated world, a sanctuary carved carefully from centuries of knowledge and experience. The fires themselves were quiet, embers breathing softly beneath ash. Occasionally, a small crackle would punctuate the stillness, followed by the slow sigh of heat spreading across stones and blankets. The flames never surged violently, never demanded attention. They moved with patience, steady and deliberate, in perfect harmony with the rhythms of life around them. Beyond the walls, the landscape remained frozen and hushed. Trees bent under the weight of frost, their branches glistening like silver in the diffused light. Snow lay smooth over every surface, softening the edges of stones and the curves of the terrain. The river, though iced over at its edges, continued its quiet journey beneath the frozen surface, carrying its hidden current onward without sound. Even the animals that roamed the outskirts of the village respected the stillness. A fox passed silently along the tree line, paws barely disturbing the snow. A herd of elk moved slowly, their breaths rising in clouds that melted into the cold air. Within the lodges, survival unfolded as a series of quiet rituals. Pots of melted snow were warmed near the fire, their steam carrying the scent of pine wood and earth. Strips of dried meat softened on heated stones, while berries absorbed warmth without losing their structure. Every motion was careful, deliberate, purposeful. The people understood that abrupt movements or wasted effort could disturb the delicate balance of heat and cold within the shelter. Every breath, every adjustment of furs, every shift of embers contributed to the survival of all within. The smoke holes above each fire vented upward, angled carefully according to the wind. Even the smallest flaps were adjusted with knowledge passed down through generations, ensuring smoke escaped while warmth remained contained. Outside, occasional gusts rattled the outer hides, but inside, the air remained steady, filtered through layers of hide, grass, and earth. The cold pressed against the edges, but could not enter. Time moved slowly in the village, measured in the pulse of the fire, and the rhythm of breath. Light gradually strengthened, illuminating frost patterns on the walls and snow-covered ground, tracing delicate lines and curves in silver and white. Shadows of poles and hanging herbs stretched and shifted as the day deepened, painting moving patterns across the floor without sound. Even the quietest of motions were imbued with purpose. A child shifted slightly in sleep, pulling a rabbit fur closer. An elder shifted a hand over a heated stone, feeling the warmth radiate upward through blankets. A caretaker nudged embers gently with a stick, coaxing life back into the flames without disturbing those resting. These movements were small, almost imperceptible, yet each was essential to maintaining the delicate equilibrium of heat, safety, and rest. Outside, snow drifted lightly across the plains. Flakes settled on tips of poles, on fur-covered roofs, and upon footprints left long ago. The world beyond the village was quiet, endless and patient, offering beauty and danger alike. And within, life endured, not through struggle against the cold, but through understanding and harmony with it. The village remained wrapped in warmth, rhythm, and unbroken silence. The smoke spiraled upward, the fires breathed gently, the stones radiated heat, the snow glimmered faintly in the muted light. Each lodge, each hearth, each sleeping form existed in perfect balance with the frozen world beyond its walls. Winter held dominion over the land, but it did not conquer the village. Its quiet strength was met by quiet persistence. Breath, fire, fur, and stone, these sustained life, shaping a rhythm older than memory itself. And so the day passed in silence, measured in the slow unfolding of heat, light, and frost, a continuation of the eternal dance between the cold outside and the warmth held within. The sun had risen higher now, though its light remained pale and silvered by clouds and frost. The village lay quiet beneath the sky, each lodge a small, steadfast heart in the midst of the frozen expanse. Smoke spiraled lazily from the central fires, drifting upward and fading into the cold air. The snow around the lodges glimmered faintly, untouched, smooth, a testament to the night that had passed and the care that had preserved warmth within. Inside, the embers breathed gently beneath layers of ash, steady and enduring. Heated stones radiated warmth slowly, pressing it upward into beds of fur and grass, cradling the bodies of those who slept. The buffalo hides, layered thickly and meticulously, absorbed the heat and held it close, while smaller furs sealed gaps, ensuring that the cold could only touch the edges of each shelter and never its heart. Time passed quietly. The snow outside reflected the pale light, creating an otherworldly glow that seeped through the thin hides of the lodges. Inside, smoke, warmth, and breath moved together in a gentle rhythm, a slow pulse connecting life to fire, to the frozen earth beneath. Even the smallest shifts, an elder stretching a hand over a stone, a child tugging a fur closer, were part of this rhythm, deliberate and essential, as if each movement were a beat in an invisible, steady drum. The world outside was vast and silent, trees bent beneath the weight of frost, ice crystals clinging to every branch and twig. The river flowed beneath a solid layer of ice, hidden and dark, yet moving relentlessly. Animals remained careful and cautious. Foxes, elk, and birds respecting the frozen stillness, stepping softly across the snow, leaving traces that would soon be covered by drifting flakes. The land itself seemed to breathe slowly, listening to the quiet heartbeat of the village within its embrace. Inside, every detail of survival was accounted for. Water had been warmed, food had been softened by the fire, the smoke holes were adjusted to maintain balance. Each lodge stood as a testament to centuries of knowledge: how to harness warmth, how to conserve life, how to live in harmony with winter instead of fighting it. Survival was not drama or struggle here, it was subtle, deliberate, and timeless. The day deepened, and light slowly spread across the snow, brushing the tops of lodges, illuminating the curves of poles, the patterns of frost, the gentle contours of hides and furs. Shadows lengthened and shifted, yet the warmth within remained constant, a quiet sanctuary against the cold. The village existed as a small, breathing world, complete and self-contained, a sanctuary where life continued peacefully, night after night, winter after winter. Even as the sun moved across the sky, its weak warmth could not compete with the fires, the heated stones, the furs, or the careful arrangements of shelter and body. And yet it mattered little. Light and warmth existed together here, as did shadow and frost, in a balance that had been refined across generations. This was the wisdom of the people, the knowledge that the cold was not an enemy, but a companion to be understood, respected, and harmonized with. As the day unfolded and the snow shimmered beneath the pale sky, the village slept and stirred in quiet rhythm. Breath, warmth, and life moved slowly together, undisturbed. Each ember in the fire was a heartbeat, each stone beneath the bedding a pulse, each fur a shield. The cold pressed against the outer walls, vast and silent, yet it did not intrude. Harmony prevailed, and when night returned, it would come again with quiet persistence, cold and unyielding. Yet the village would endure, as it always had. Fires would glow, stones would radiate, furs would hold warmth, and breath would rise into the smoke, blending with the infinite quiet of winter. In this way, the cycle continued. Night followed day, cold met warmth, silence met life, and through it all, the people endured, not by defiance, but through understanding, patience, and the slow, steady wisdom of generations. The last ember of the fire burned gently, orange and unhurried beneath ash. It glowed faintly, a small heart of light in the vast winter night, and as it pulsed, warmth spread, silent and enduring across the lodge, the village, and the living earth itself. Winter would return as it always did, but so too would life endure. The balance had been achieved. The cold had been respected, and the fire, like the people, had persevered, steady, eternal, and unbroken. And in the quiet, under the stars, beneath the snow, life slept in perfect harmony.